If you write the poem you know already, why write it? It's boring. You should write the poem you don't know. Be surprised by the poem. The poem is like a bigger self. It will give you an answer. It will give you an insight. You just plunge into it.
Hello and welcome to Outlook Bibliofile. Today we have with us Israeli poet and author Mr. Amir Or. Thank you, Mr. Or. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Tell us a bit about yourself, how you started off as a poet.
Well, actually, I started as a poet as far as I can remember myself. I composed my first poems when I was 4 years old, before I knew how to write and read. And these were persona poems, which means my toys. I gave them voice, like my teddy bear, my little rabbit, elephant. Each of them had something to say, and it was all rhymed and metered. And my mother used to write it down, which gave me the greatest gift as a poet can get, because she conveyed to me this is something important in the world.
So you obviously come from Israel. Can you tell us a little bit about the poetry scene in Israel? How vibrant it is, or new poets are coming up, or anything about that?
Constantly. It's a very vibrant poetic scene. With new, very good, talented young poets coming to the stage every year. And I was very deeply involved in that because I started a poetry society and a poetry school.
You also edit a journal.
Edited a journal and a book series, etc. Promoting, fostering this new generation of poets year after year. By now, many of my students are well-known poets. So it's a very good place for poetry.
Okay. With changing times, there are challenges to every art form, and today, when everything is so fast-paced, I guess same goes for literature. What would you say that the challenges that form of poetry is facing today?
Well, poetry is facing brainwashing in what we call the free world. People are very often deprived of their right, I think, to feel and think for themselves. If you look at free countries, the regimes, just like in totalitarian countries, would like the citizens, the people, to be distracted in every possible way, to watch soap operas on TV, to play computer games, go shopping, and vote every 4 years, but not to feel and think for themselves. So in that sense, poetry is a kind of rebellion. It's a kind of a threat. And a true democracy would help the people to see the truth that poetry can convey, the individual place where they can create reality for themselves. But these people nowadays have to scratch for themselves with their mental nails, almost. Popular forms of art are very often shallow, are very often kind of entertainment. And I have nothing against entertainment, but poetry is not about facts. Poetry is about truth. Poetry comes to show you something about yourself and your fellow man in a deep way.
It triggers reflection.
Definitely.
Since you made these statements, have you sought to challenge these notions in your work? Have you ever fiddled with political thoughts in your poetry, through your poetry?
Of course, because to me the subject of poetry is life in all its facets, in all its aspects, and politics is a part of it. Not in the sense of which party to vote, but in the sense of how we should be humane, how we should foster liberal ideas, freedom as much as possible, yes. And also protesting against evil deeds that are done by either individuals or states.
So in that context, would you like to say anything about the politics back home in Israel? Obviously there's constant conflict, there's tension with the neighbors.
I would rather read to you a poem that has to do with politics instead. The Barbarians, Round 2. It was not in vain that we awaited the barbarians. It was not in vain that we gathered in the city square. It was not in vain that our great ones put on their official robes and rehearsed their speeches for the event. It was not in vain that we smashed our temples and erected new ones to their gods. As proper, we burnt our books that have nothing in them for people like that. As the prophecy foretold, the barbarians came and took the keys to the city from the king's hand. But when they came, they wore the garments of the land, and their customs were the customs of the state. And when they commanded us in our own tongue, we no longer knew when the barbarians had come to us.
What would your advice be to budding poets, people who want to write, people who want to be associated with the form of poetry, but for some reasons maybe are not taking that final leap? What would be your advice to them?
First of all, write. Even if you can improve your poetry, don't be hesitant to write it. You can always improve by reading, by learning models of very good poets. But the first thing is to let yourself speak. Don't shut your own mouth because you're afraid that you don't write good enough, or because you don't allow yourself to speak the painful thing or the deeper thing of your life.
Could you tell us one aspect?
You don't have to know what you are doing, really. Because, if you write the poem you know already, why write it? It's boring. You should write the poem you don't know. Be surprised by the poem. The poem is like a bigger self. It will give you an answer. It will give you an insight. You just plunge into it.
Could you tell us one aspect probably that you think that something that can only be conveyed through the medium of poetry? Some emotion, anything which may not be possibly conveyed as strongly through other mediums, perhaps a novel or an essay, something that is conveyed best through poetry?
Well, I think poetry is a demanding form of art, but in a good way. Because, if I write a novel, there's a story, and you are inside the story, carried by the events. In a poem, you have to do a different kind of work. You have to create a dialogue. And the dialogue is created by you bringing in your life. If I write about a leaf falling in the autumn and is thrown on the ground just like I am, then one will think about the time she was divorced, somebody else about the time he was fired, somebody else about the time he was in meditation. Who knows? Okay. The more you bring yourself in, the more the poem can give you. The poem is a trigger. The poem is a calling. It's not a story.
You are here in Delhi. Did you explore the city? Did you have a chance to go around? What do you think about the poetry scene here? You interacted with many people here, I'm sure.
Oh, I heard a lot of very good poetry from Indian poets here that took part in the festival, in the biennale. Then I was surprised how very good poetry is written here. As to Delhi itself, I didn't have time to explore yet. I saw the Lodi Gardens just nearby, and I hope to see a little bit more. But I've been in Delhi before, and very interesting city with a very rich history. But you can say that about India at large, such an interesting country with such rich cultures, I would say, not only culture and history.
Okay. Finally, what are you working on, some of your future projects or something that you would want to do in the future?
Oh, I'm working now on a new novel about the life of Moses.
Okay.
So that's what I'm doing at the moment. And normally I go somewhere to work in peace without any distractions. So that's what I'm going to do next in Belgium.
Okay, what's your process of writing? Many people, it depends upon from person to person. Some go in total isolation. Some have their specific place where they go and they sort of get the trigger to write. How does poetry come to you? How do you write?
Well, it can come in everyday life, but I wake up in the morning and let my pen go. Not necessarily write poems, whatever comes. If I have a bigger theme that I want to work on, I go somewhere and in total isolation, and then I do that because I want no distraction at all. So I feel and think around this theme 24 hours. If I don't know what comes next, I sleep for 10 minutes and get the answer in my sleep. So 24 hours, including sleeping hours, are working on the new poetry.
Thank you very much for talking to us. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much, sir.